Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the House of Commons Committee Room 11, and to, of course, this conference today. My name is Tasmina Amachik. I'm the chair of the ALBA Party and have the privilege of chairing today's important briefing. Our ALBA Westminster leader, Neil Hanby, has today published a legal opinion from Professor Robert McCorquodale on, I quote, matters relating to international legal issues concerning the right to self-determination for the people of Scotland. The opinion on international law is the first of two major legal documents to inform the Scottish independence debate. The second, to be published in coming weeks, is from a leading Scottish advocate and will deal with domestic law and how the Supreme Court ignored the Scottish constitutional tradition of popular sovereignty. Professor McCorquodale is a highly distinguished academic and legal practitioner specialising in international law. He's been an advocate before the International Court of Justice and is an expert member of the United Nations working groups. We hold presentations, first of all, for our panel, namely Neil Hanby, MP, the Member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, then from the Right Honourable Alex Salmon, former First Minister of Scotland and leader of the ALBA Party, and finally we'll be joined by Ken McCaskill, the ALBA MP for East Lothian, who's currently chairing another meeting in a nearby committee meeting room. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Neil Hanby, MP, to take us to the opinion. Neil.
Thanks very much, Taz. I'll remain seated if that's okay. I just want to welcome everyone this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. It will be of little surprise to anyone that I have never been confused about the reason I stood for and was elected to this Parliament, because I carry with me the hope, aspiration and ambition of so many who wish to see Scotland's rightful return as an independent nation. Despite the tumult of political events north and south of the border, alongside Kenny McCaskill in Parliament and my ALBA Party colleagues out with, I have consistently honoured that commitment. On the 23rd of November last year, the UK Supreme Court ruled that the Scottish Parliament does not have the powers necessary to legislate for a referendum on Scottish independence. 1 week later, on St Andrew's Day, I led a debate in Westminster Hall which considered UK government policy on a further independence referendum for Scotland. In my contribution, I set out arguments against that judgment, which set my course to this meeting today and no doubt beyond. The UK Supreme Court contend that a Scottish government may not exercise a democratic mandate handed to them by the people of Scotland to hold a referendum on independence. Whilst within the limited constraints of devolved legislative competency, that may be technically accurate, but the judgment went further than that. And that is something that simply cannot stand and cannot be tolerated. There was a suggestion in that judgment that somehow Scotland, as a nation, does not possess a right to self-determination. In suggesting that, the London Supreme Court overturned what had been the accepted legal, historic and political position that the UK is a voluntary union. In light of Professor McCorquodale's expert opinion, this notion is now robustly challenged. For political and historical context, in 1707, a majority of Scottish parliamentarians may have been persuaded that the people of Scotland were never consulted. The Acts of Union 1707 between England and Scotland created the Kingdom of Great Britain, establishing a single political entity. However, it preserved the territorial, the legal and institutional integrity of each partner country. The Supreme Court have repudiated that, rendering this UK state a state of glaring contradiction. On the 1st of February this year, I brought forward the Scotland Self-Determination Bill, which passed first reading unopposed. Succinctly, the bill seeks to remedy the following extant contradictions. Since 2011, the people of Scotland have consistently provided the governments and parliamentarians they have elected with a mandate for a referendum on the country's constitutional future. Following the 2014 referendum, further such mandates have been provided to revisit the constitutional question should Scotland be an independent country. Such a mandate is wholly consistent with paragraph 18 of the Smith Commission report of November 2014, endorsed by all 5 Holyrood parties, which states without caveat, it is agreed that nothing in this report prevents Scotland becoming an independent country in the future, should the people of Scotland so choose. Although the Smith Commission report does not specify a device with which to enact this commitment, the democratic mechanism was established by First Minister Alex Salmond through the Edinburgh Agreement in 2013, yet the UK government are now refusing to honour that process established in good faith. Following the Good Friday Agreement, a similar mechanism was established in Section 1 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, which brought into law a device whereby the peoples of Northern Ireland could democratically demonstrate their preferred constitutional future. This device favours neither one side of the debate or the other. It is neutral in that regard. The right of a people to self-determination is a cardinal principle of modern international law as set out in the UN Charter. It states that peoples, based on respect for the principle of equal rights and fair equality of opportunity, have the right to freely choose their sovereignty and international political status with no interference. As internationally recognised peoples living within a defined territory, a representative government and the facility to informally engage with the international community, the people of Scotland can readily meet the accepted criteria of statehood as set out in the Montevideo Convention of 1933. Professor McCorquodale's opinion confirms that the people of Scotland are distinct within the UK and have a right to self-determination, and that the right to self-determination applies to the people of Scotland. He goes on to state, as the people of Scotland are a people for the purposes of the right to self-determination, they can exercise it. The choice of the means to exercise is for the people to decide, not for the state. Furthermore, Professor McCorquodale explains that the UK, as a signatory to multilateral international human rights treaties, has expressly accepted that the right to self-determination is a human right and not just an international legal principle, which is binding under international law on all states. He also asserts that secession is not unlawful under international law. My Scotland Self-Determination Bill does nothing more than ask the UK government to honour those principles of equal rights and equality of opportunity by establishing an equal provision of all distinct peoples within the UK. The opinion I'm publishing today provides an expert legal underpinning for the right to self-determination of all peoples within the current Union. The opinion provides robust challenge to the flawed judgment of the UK Supreme Court. Politically, this indicates two things I would like to highlight. Firstly, that whatever your view on the merits of asking the UK Supreme Court the question, it is now beyond doubt that it was quite wrong for the then Scottish First Minister and the current Scottish First Minister to merely accept the judgment in absence of such expert international legal opinion. And secondly, the folly of the last 8 years has been a narrow focus of requesting a further Section 30 order to the exclusion of all other viable considerations. This opinion opens up a number of internationally acceptable democratic options for the people of Scotland to stake our claim of statehood and return to a waiting world. Let's be clear, Scotland is not powerless. We have a government, we have a parliament, and we have a nation waiting to be led. No one claims it will be easy, but our nation has never lacked courage in the past, nor have we lacked pride. And the days of Scotland dancing to the tune of Westminster should be brought to a swift close. That concludes my contribution. I'm now going to hand over to Alec, who will go back to the chair, and she'll decide who speaks.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. And we'll take questions at the end relative to your contribution and that, which we're about to hear from former First Minister Alexander.
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted you went back to the chair, Neil, because I'm going to start with a story which I think is apposite for today. I was recollecting, because we're in committee room 11 of the House of Commons, in the committee corridor of the House of Commons, and I was reflecting that 30 years or so ago, sitting in the chair was the late Michael Martin, subsequently become Speaker of the House of Commons, and sitting somewhere in the benches there was me as a young member of the House from Aberdeenshire. It was a Scottish Education Committee. And Michael noticed my presence and was somewhat surprised because I hadn't been actually appointed a member of the committee. I was there protesting against the fact that the committee was full of Conservative members from English constituencies who were about to change fundamentally, as they thought, Scottish education, and the SNP, with 4 members, I think it was then, were denied a seat on the committee. Michael found out that he didn't have the powers to expel me from the committee, and he ended up having to suspend the entire committee. There was later a debate on my conduct, which took 3 hours in the House of Commons. I came out rather better from that debate than Boris Johnson did yesterday. But the point was this, that at that time, around 1990, it was considered quite normal for members from English constituencies to change fundamentally against the will of Scottish MPs, against the will of the Scottish people, central tenets of the Scottish education system. And it's worth telling the story because it indicates how far we have come in that period of time. It would now be considered extraordinary, incredible, absolutely fundamentally strange if a queue of MPs from English constituencies said we will obtain the majority on a committee and we will decide what happens in Scottish education. But that was the norm back in 1990. And instead of being on natural justice, what should have happened is the rest of the committee being suspended. I was suspended for protesting against that undemocratic fact. Now, devolution and history have subsequently altered the position fundamentally. But the reason for today's press conference, 7 months after the Supreme Court pronounced its verdict, is to address another undemocratic proposition which has been sold to the people of Scotland. It is absolutely important, and I congratulate Neil Hanby on this initiative today in acquiring the opinion from Robert McCorkindale, and indeed in his Scottish Self-Determination Bill, which we have before us today as well. Because the Supreme Court's judgment required to be challenged. It has to be challenged in 2 ways. Firstly, on their mistaken belief that somehow Scotland doesn't unilaterally have the right of self-determination. In the Supreme Court's judgment, for those who are familiar with it, in the course of 8 paragraphs stuck on at the end of the judgment, they suggested that the reason Scotland didn't have the right to act unilaterally through a referendum or whatever other means, it was because it wasn't a colony. As Robert McCorkindale points out in his impressive opinion, if that were the case, if you needed the permission of the predecessor state to assert your right of self-determination, then the United Nations would not have grown from 50 members to 200 members in the years since the Second World War. It is an absurdity. And then it stood for the last 7 months waiting to be challenged. So I'm delighted that Neil Hanby has secured this hugely impressive and important opinion. And I'm even more delighted to understand that it will be a companion piece of a second legal opinion which will attack the court's attitude to that golden thread of Scottish sovereignty which has run through Scottish history, the sovereignty of the people, which the court treated in dismissive fashion by hardly mentioning it at all. Mind you, it would have been helpful if the Lord Advocate had spent some time making the proposition in her submissions, but nonetheless, I am pleased to find out there will be a second and companion opinion to this. But McCorkindale's opinion in sweeping aside and pointing out the glaring mistakes in the Supreme Court's lack of knowledge of international law by a professor, of course, who is the go-to international lawyer of the United Nations at the present moment, and involved in many, many cases, particularly in the case of the Chagos Islanders, where in the last count, I think, the support for the United Kingdom position has been reduced to 5 members of the United Nations. So the Crocodile has a track record of mobilising international opinion when the United Kingdom government is behaving unreasonably, and therefore his remarks on the Supreme Court's judgment carry huge international authority. So congratulations to Neil Hanbury for pointing the way. But there's a second issue which requires to be addressed from the Supreme Court's judgment. And here, I should say, the Supreme Court actually, in its judgment, said something quite important in paragraph 81, when they noted that whatever the legal status of a ballot box vote, it carried political significance. Now, they were talking in particular about a referendum, but the same would apply to a general election. Because the second thing that required to be done following the Supreme Court judgment 7 months ago was to evolve a new political strategy to meet the new circumstances. It's devastatingly clear to anyone with eyes to see that the referendum route to independence, established at the advent of the Scottish Parliament in 1999, has now been blocked. It's been closed off, at least for the time being, perhaps forever. And therefore, what you do is you find a new route, a new democratic way to advance the cause of independence, a new way to allow the Scottish people to exercise their undoubted right of self-determination. And that must be, and can only be, the ballot box at general elections in the UK or Scottish elections in Scotland. And that is why that is what now requires to be addressed by the national movement, the political strategy to answer the Supreme Court. Now, ALBA, as a political party supported by others, have put forward the view that immediately this should be done in next year's general election. The criticality of that is obvious. We live in a time where support for independence, the average of the last 4 opinion polls is 50%. Support for the Scottish National Party in the last poll is 35%. If we continue as things are, then there is a severe danger that many independent supporting MPs will no longer be MPs after the next UK general election. It doesn't have to be like that. At a time where the Scottish National Party's fortunes as a political party are under the cloud, quite clearly the route forward is to appeal to the 50% of the population who believe in Scottish independence, and which support is rock solid, according to every survey. And to have the generosity of mind and spirit to reach beyond past political enmities or disagreements, and to recognise that the cause of Scotland and the position that Scotland finds itself in is so critical that at the next election we should bury these political differences and stand as a Scotland United for Independence platform. Crying in aid, the Supreme Court's paragraph 81, suggesting that a ballot box is always politically significant in any country with a democratic culture. It would, of course, be reverting to the position which the SNP pursued since 1970 and was accepted by every United Kingdom Prime Minister in this place. The position that prevailed when I was in this committee room being brought to order by Michael Martin, and that was that a victory for independence at the general election would be a verdict of the people for independence. If the referendum route is blocked, that is a position that must be reverted to. What cannot be done is accepting the idea that the people of Scotland don't have a ballot box democratic right to express their wish for self-determination. So the best way to do it is we're Scotland United for Independence. If we do that, then instead of the political debate and context being on how many seats are going to be lost to the unionist parties, the debate would centre on how many surviving unionists will be facing a Scotland United for Independence coalition. So the verdict of the Supreme Court 7 months ago requires a legal response. Congratulations to Neil Hanbury for requiring this opinion, and I look forward to the second opinion from the Scottish Advocate on Scottish domestic law. But it also requires a political response, and that is a matter for the political parties, for the national movement, for those who believe in the cause of Scotland beyond everything else.
Thank you very much indeed. Alex, we'll now move to questions, and first I'll take Hamish Morrison of the National. Welcome, Hamish.
So, I was just wondering, there's outlined sort of next steps here to international legal routes. Have you made representations to, or will you make representations to the SNP or to the Scottish Government about the findings of this report?
Neil?
Well, I'm more than happy to make representations to the SNP. I've been reaching out to the SNP throughout recent months, and I will continue to make those efforts. I think the opinion really speaks for itself. There are some absolutely key messages in there, and I think every single one of us who wants to see independence delivered would be best placed to take cognizance of that and to build that into our planning, because where we are now is there's a few distinct elements in the opinion that are important for consideration. The first is that the Section 30 order route is not the only route. There are a range of different options available to the people of Scotland to demonstrate their desire for self-determination and mechanisms for them to bring that forward. So that's the first point that I would make. The second point is that because the UK, or the Scottish Government, is effectively an organ of the UK state, and that is why it's constrained. It is the reservation of powers is part of the UK arrangement. It's not a reflection on a Scottish Parliament. And because it's a part of that apparatus, there is a need to look at this through a slightly different prism, if you like. So that's part of the UK state. But the people of Scotland and their rights to self-determination are not bound to an organ of the UK state, and therefore the movement, and this is a point I've been making many times in the last couple of years, the movement are absolutely central players in how we take the case for independence forward, because one of the issues that Professor Corkadale alludes to in his opinion is that it should be not the devolved government that takes the case forward, but actually a representative body of the people of Scotland. And that's something that we would hope to deliver through an independence convention and the people's movement, where that would be established properly. But there are some really important lessons in this opinion that should guide every single person who's interested in independence in their considerations of how we move the whole issue forward.
Two sort of interlinked second questions then. So, so you'd have no concrete plans to discuss this report with Scottish ministers then?
At the moment, I mean, the concrete plan is I'm willing to sit down and meet with them and talk about it at any time.
But you've not requested any meetings with
Not
Scottish ministers? Okay, that's fine. And who then does the responsibility for the conventions, for the setting up of conventions fall to?
Yep, I'm going to pass that one to Can I just, by a point of clarification, Neil, just if I may, just ask for a copy of the bill, because the bill, just relative to Hamish's question, asking about engagement, etc., very important question. This, of course, has been around for a number of months now. I wanted to check on the face of the bill. It is supported by Ken McCaskill, Joanna Cherry, Angus Brendan McNeill, Douglas Chapman and Margaret Ferrier. Can I ask you, since those names have been detailed as supporters of the bill, if there's been any further support for the bill by other members of Parliament?
No, I think it was, the head count was around 14 SNP members supported the bill when it was moved. But I've had, I mean, it's not that I haven't sought out conversations with members of the SNP, but it's difficult to engage with people who look at you, for lack of a better expression. But I'm willing to engage with anyone, absolutely.
And at this point, it's perfectly possible to add support for this bill in terms of procedure.
Yeah, I can see the reason why.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Alex, just part of your Hamish's question.
Right, okay, well, the Deal's opinion has been published today, and hopefully by the publication by the good officers of of online by your own good offices, Hamish, that it'll get a wide circulation. It's available for everybody to read. It's new information. It's the first major legal figure to take down the Supreme Court judgment, and it has huge importance. I don't want to like any member of the Supreme Court, but none of them international lawyers, of course. Robert McCorkadale is a lawyer that has enormous legal expertise in domestic law. There's no background in international law whatsoever, apart from being the president of the Hong Kong court at one time, but nonetheless that was about common law, Hong Kong law. Robert McCorkadale is very much an international legal expert and reflects what is the current view and context of international law. Now, in particular, I'll be discussing this opinion with a range of groups from the Yes movement. It's a private meeting, but private meetings are important in terms of getting cross-party and non-party discussion on the matter, because one of the points, as Neil rightly says, that McCorkadale says that an avenue for expressing and for gathering international support for a national case is to have a constitutional convention. Many countries have gone down that route. Now, that constitutional convention should be anchored by people who are direct representatives of the electorate, but shouldn't be restricted to that. It should embrace civic society as well. And a very reasonable model for that is the Constitutional Convention of the 1980s and 90s in Scotland, which had elected members, but also civic society. But that would be to progress the independence case. But nonetheless, is what do you do when Westminster says no? What do you do when Westminster says no, we're not having it? Well, one thing is set out, you don't gain a referendum in Scotland by arguing for a referendum. If the referendum route is blocked, then you move to looking for a ballot box mandate for independence, because the key criteria of a Scotland United for Independence plan is to say we're looking for a mandate to negotiate independence from Westminster. You then say what happens, and that has enormous force, as the Supreme Court itself admitted. That has huge impact to do that, to say this is looking for a mandate for independence, not a discussion about something else, not more powers for the Parliament, not turning Sir Keir Starmer into a left-wing politician, but a mandate for Scottish independence. If then there's still got a blockage, then what you do is you mobilise a constitutional convention. You look for direct mobilisation in Scotland for people in favour of independence, and you look for international support for independence. Now, as McCorkadale himself says, these are not easy things to do, but as he also points out, they've been successful in many, many countries. That is why there's now almost 200 members of the United Nations, and people find a political route through. And it would be very unlikely if the United Kingdom government was able to withstand such a democratic move for Scottish independence, backed at the ballot box with an unimpeachable mandate, no more than it was able to withstand demands for independence from a range of other countries over that period of time.
Do you have a further question, Hamish?
I was just going to press a little bit. Surely the natural chair or convener of a Scottish Independence Convention would be the Scottish Government. I mean, it just strikes me as odd that there aren't any concrete plans to make representations to the Scottish Government.
McCorkadale actually makes the opposite. He says, when you're in a situation where the devolved government has been ruled by the Supreme Court as a creature of state, then it has advantages in the case for independence being taken forward by a constitutional convention. Now, by definition, let's say we move into a political world where Scotland United for Independence, the vast majority of candidates of which would be SNP MPs. But let's say that Scotland United for Independence, on a mandate to negotiate independence in Westminster, sweeps the ballot box, right? Then they would be looking for there to be a negotiation on independence between the Scottish Government and the UK Government. So let's say the UK Government says no, despite the fact that we've been humiliated at the ballot box, there's a clear mandate for independence, despite the fact that we're under enormous political pressure, we're not going to do it. Then you have to have an appeal both to the mobilisation of society and to international opinion. And at that point, as McCorkadale points out, the normal route that's been followed is to have a convention comprising of elected members, but also embracing civic society as well.
One final one, if you don't mind. Are you hopeful that any of this will be taken up at the SNP Independence Convention?
Well, I'm not sure that well, the SNP is entitled to have internal meetings. They are entitled to do that. At some point, the meetings have to go cross-party, non-party, because the movement is bigger than any one political party. Even the dominant political party is not the whole of the national movement. And that's obviously very clear from the opinion polls at the present moment. But I mean, I can understand people who want to sort out their own policy first, but at some point it has to embrace the whole national movement as well as being cross-party. Because if it doesn't, then next year does not look like it's going to be a good year for Scottish independence.
Is that a call for the SNP to listen to the contents of this report?
I hope everyone does. It is. I mean, look, the opinion has been sought and brought, and therefore it should now be mobilised and brought into it. Looking at what hasn't been done over the last 7 months, perhaps it's as productive as looking at what should be done now. So well done, Neil Handy, for being the person who commissioned the opinion from the right person, and let's hope that the contents of the McCorkadale paper give heart, encouragement, intellectual and legal ballast to all those who want to see Scotland move forward to independence.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and welcome to Kenny McCaskill, East Lothian MP. Thank you for joining us, Kenny. I've got an online question before I move to the next question from the floor. I'm afraid I don't have a name, but just to be clear, because there's a lot of words here, just a clear answer. Is the view of the opinion of Professor Robert McCorkadale that a general election victory would be a legitimate and lawful means to exert an independence mandate without holding an independence referendum? Scotland United's general election victory, where it's a clear view of the people of Scotland that they want independence. In terms of his opinion, would that be enough without having to hold an independent referendum?
No, what McCorkadale's opinion does is to challenge the judgment of the Supreme Court that said that Scotland wasn't entitled to make a unilateral initiative towards independence. If you remember, the Supreme Court said that Scotland is not a colony. They cited the Supreme Court of Canada, wrongly as it turns out, in terms of the Quebec judgment. The point about McCorkadale is to refute that attack by the Supreme Court on the ability of Scotland to generate a vote for independence. The political moves, as I've tried to say, that's an important legal ballast for those of us who want to see Scotland act independently and politically. But the political moves in this are in the hands of politicians. It's for politicians to say that we recognise that a referendum isn't going to be on offer from the UK government, and therefore we find another ballot box opportunity. But as I pointed out, you can actually cite the Supreme Court against itself. I have to say I thank Angus McNeill, the Member of Parliament for Neil Yanir, for pointing this out to me some weeks ago. So credit where credit's due.
Thank you, Alex. Can I bring in Neil?
Yeah, I would make 2 points. I'll pick up briefly on the last point, that the days effectively of one party being able to say we are the vehicle, I think is made clear that could be problematic, according to the McCorkadale opinion, that it's much greater, there's much greater power in a united movement, and therefore that supports the Scotland United ticket. As far as democratic mandates go, I mean, a referendum is a referendum and a general election is a general election. But if you are asking a specific question, as we have indicated we want to do, or making a specific commitment to begin negotiations for independence on the back of the Scotland United victory, then in terms of democratic expression, they are similar in that they record the wishes and the will of the people. And I think that's a fundamental principle that Professor McCorkadale sets out with regards to self-determination. So is it a referendum? Well, no, because they're both different things. Is it a valid democratic expression of the will of the people? Well, yes, it is. Would that be the only thing that you would have to do? Well, absolutely not, because there will be other consequential activities that you want to undertake, and such as the ones that Alec has set out with the convention and how you get internally organised. But it is a valid democratic expression, and it is not something that currently is being denied by the Westminster Government.
Thank you, Neil. Alex, want to come back in?
Well, I was just going to note that there was actually an opinion poll last week published by ALBA which asked people directly, the people of Scotland, would you regard such a victory by Scotland United for Independence Alliance as a mandate for independence, and by a majority of the people of Scotland thought they would do. So even though it's a very new concept, there's a lot of support for it, and that support will grow hopefully in time for it to be brought into effect for next year.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for your forbearance. Andrew Quint of the Daily Record.
Yeah. Is Margaret Ferrier going to stand as an ALBA candidate in the Rutherglen by-election?
Not to my knowledge.
Would you like her to?
Well, I mean, Margaret will have to decide whether she's standing. I mean, that's a matter for Margaret. As I mean, I know both Kenny and Neil voted against what happened to her in the Commons, not because they approved of her actions, as she has said many times that she did the wrong thing and she accepted punishment for it. That was well understood, but there seemed to be a severe discrepancy between her treatment and the treatment of other people. But there's been no discussions with Margaret about her standing for ALBA, and I do not know if she intends to stand at all. And I think probably, I know that the ballot was open today. I also know that lots of people are telling the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West how they should vote in the recall ballot. But maybe we should just let the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West decide if there's going to be a by-election before we stand in it. So that's what I intend to do. We'll see what the people decide, and if there is an election, then I will decide what to do.
And do you think this legal judgment is going to make any difference? Or what difference do you think it's going to make?
Well, if you remember, the reason, if we go back, I mean, obviously, I and Neil and Kenny thought it was very unwise to go to the Supreme Court last year for a judgment. And I note in McCorkadale's opinion, he rightly observes that he can't think of a case in history where the Supreme Court of a predecessor state has said, here's your advice on how to dissolve the Supreme Court, which is effectively what. So none of us could understand what the motivation or what the rationale behind it. But we are where we are in Scottish politics, largely as a result of that decision to go to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court's ruling. Everything else has been discussed about alternative routes to independence. What you do when the Supreme Court says no referendum is as a result of that application and that ruling. So therefore, to have a direct challenge to one key element of the Supreme Court's judgment is really important. It's not a substitute for the political action to bring political pressure to bear, but nonetheless having the legal ballast for what you're doing is very important. It provides a framework and a justification and an argument for Scotland. So I think it's important that the Supreme Court is not allowed to have the last word on Scotland's right of self-determination. And incidentally, I mean, very few people in Scotland are going to read the Supreme Court judgment, the McCorkadale opinion, even Neil Handy's fantastic Scottish self-determination bill. But if you ask folk in Scotland, is Scotland a real nation? Should Scotland have the right to decide its own future? Should Scotland be an independent country if a majority of Scotland want to be an independent country? Then people understand that question. And the result across the country, certainly in the Daily Record leaders, would be a massive, overwhelming yes.
And you spoke about as well a general election victory for independent support parties. What does that mean? Does it mean over 50% of seats, or is it over 50% of votes?
I would say it's over 50% of votes for the and the reason for that being, if you unite all the parties together under the Scotland United for Independence banner, then that's what we'd be looking for. And you see, the interesting thing is with this, I mean, people cite opinion polls, but now we've got a dozen opinion polls showing effectively the same thing. doesn't hold showing rock solid support for Scottish independence at roughly half the population. But obviously, and I'm making no political point of this other than it's just a fact, that the SNP supports some difficulty, as a result of the crowd over the SNP finances or whatever. So in that environment, to appeal to the 50% of people who believe in independence on the principle of Scotland's right of self-determination seems good politics as well as principled politics and the politics of success. And in that environment, you should be looking to get a majority of votes, because it would be one single candidate for independence in each constituency, mobilising that support and putting forward that argument, and you would change the entire nature of what's being discussed in Scottish politics at the present moment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Taz. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the question, will it make a difference? Because if I could take you back to it, probably my favourite campaign poster of the independence referendum in 2014 was a poster that had the word "can't" with the T crossed out. It said "can." And what this opinion does is precisely that. The UK Supreme Court have told Scotland that it can't express its will of self-determination. And what this opinion does is tell Scotland that it can press its right for Scottish self-determination. So yes, I think it's a significant development in terms of the legal basis of how we move things forward.
Thank you. Do you want to come back and then you have that, Andrew?
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Kenny, I wonder if I can ask you to just bring some clarification, because the words independence, constitutional convention have been moved around in different formulations and seem to be meaning different things to different people. I think it's important that there's some clarity. I wonder if you could just distinguish for people here today and watching online what the constitutional convention is, to which Professor Robert McCorquodale refers to in his opinion, and how that is distinct from motions you yourself have brought to ALBA Party Conference relative to an independence convention, and not an independence convention relative to a particular party, but the broader sense of an independence convention. So the difference, please, if I may, between an independence convention that ALBA have been calling for and the constitutional convention as referred to in the opinion.
Well, I think there's probably even an additional convention that's being talked about, because we have a charade on Saturday that's been called a convention, which is just based on SNP gathering with a few others invited along to contribute. It doesn't have any agenda, those going with no real mandate other than just simply having paid their fee to go. You have a constitutional convention that's been talked about by ALBA about bringing together independent supporters to try and gather to make sure that the momentum is there, especially as the SNP goes backwards. So I think what Professor McCorquodale has said is put in the respect of the significant importance of a convention, because it cannot come from a government or parliament. As such, a convention is what gives the legitimacy. Those who go to that convention have a mandate, a democratic mandate. Our argument has always been that it should be those who are elected to Holyrood and those elected to the Westminster Parliament. They have stood on a manifesto, they have been given that, and they should come together to lay the framework that the Supreme Court may say no, the British government may say no, but the people of Scotland are deciding. What Professor McCorquodale has said is that that is the basis upon which you can then go forward with the arguments in international arena, whether with governments, whether with international courts. The Constitutional Convention formally set with the democratic mandate of those who go. Others can be present, and we've always said that others from the trade union movement, local government should be present, that those who have the deciding vote and actually cast their authority are those with that mandate. But I think what McCorquodale shows is the importance of a convention, not the charade we see on Saturday. You could have that convention now, because those who are elected both to Holyrood and to Westminster have a democratic mandate, have sought it and have been given it, and the people of Scotland should not be facing a cold winter, and the Constitutional Convention could step into the plate where a no ifs, no buts referendum was to be coming on the 18th of October. But if that doesn't happen, it's certainly the formula that should be used in future years after further elections.
Thank you very much indeed. Ken, you have another question from David, reference point number 98. of Professor McCockadale's opinion, which states that the starting point is that the state must be prepared to take action on behalf of Scotland. This is relative to one of the avenues asking the question. I think of the ICG, if I'm remembering correctly. The starting point is that the state must be prepared to take action on behalf of Scotland. Has any independent state been approached to make a representation to the UN on behalf of Scotland? I doubt in the space of the opinion being received and that time having passed. I know ALBA wants independence soonest, but I think even that is wishful thinking. And indeed, the entity which asks the question, I'm going to pass to Alex to clarify who that entity will require to be in law. The further question is, has a representation approach been made? And if not, are there any plans, or could we suggest that plans should perhaps be made to approach Ireland, Iceland, or any indeed members of EFTA? Alex?
Well, and obviously, as you rightly say, the opinion has just been published. But it's exactly the sort of approach that would be made by the Constitutional Convention that Kenny has just referred to. I mean, I could say the First Minister, not looking at a particular opinion, because we had an agreed path to a referendum and decision. But I met with heads of state who indicated that under the circumstances of democratic decision, they would be delighted to support Scotland's case at the United Nations. Well, that's 10 years ago, but I can't think that things will be much different now. If there's a democratic expression for independence from Scotland, and that's acknowledged and recorded at a ballot box, Scotland will have many friends and allies around the world. And it's true, of course, that in times gone by, the United Kingdom had many friends and allies, but the United Kingdom has been jettisoning these allies by the bucket load. I mean, it used to be automatic that every other member of the European Union would support a fellow member state. It's no longer automatic now. So the UK has made a number of countries feel very uncomfortable. But more than that, the countries would now recognise democracy when they see it. And the case of Mauritius is very instructive. This is Mauritius' application on behalf of the Chagos Islanders. When that application was first made many years ago, there wasn't a huge support for that across the UN, the application to the International Court of Justice. But now, the United Kingdom, I think on the last count, has only 4 supporters left in the entire United Nations, defending its position with regard to the Chagos Islanders. I suspect Scotland, under the circumstances of a mandate in an election, of a constitutional convention being formed to enforce that mandate, would find that there would be supporters. You only actually need one progression case in the ICJ, and I think Scotland would manage a great deal more than that. And I think the United Kingdom government would be increasingly isolated in international terms if it was demonstrating its wish to deny the sovereignty and democratic rule of the Scottish people. Obviously, the international arena is only one arena. The political arena in Scotland, both in terms of the ballot box and in terms of popular mobilisation, is more important. It's the thing that really counts. But nonetheless, I don't think Scotland will lack support of friends internationally when the time comes.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. And Neil, the point of clarification with yourself was, I wanted to make sure that the opinion was going to be made available also via the House of Commons Library, so everyone can make sure they have access to it. And this is purely for readers of the National. I indeed was the MP ensured that the National was made available in the House of Commons Library for the first time when I became a Member of Parliament. I'm going to ask you all, if I may, to consider closing remarks, but just one final question, Alex, to yourself again online. If in 2012 the UK government didn't transfer the powers to hold a referendum to the Scottish Parliament, do you think you would have been able to use an election victory as a legitimate means to deliver independence? Well,
I have 2 basic levers in my armoury in 2012 in negotiations with the UK government. One was their knowledge that if they turned down the agreed consented referendum under Section 30, then I intended to have our own referendum in Scotland, and I was well aware of the necessity for making that referendum compatible with and likely to survive challenge in courts, including the Supreme Court, although I am expecting it first on the Scottish courts. So we already had that as a device if there was a... I mean, I didn't think the UK government were in any danger of saying point blank no to a referendum. I thought far more likely, what I was much more on the lookout for was attempts to frustrate the referendum through a 40% rule, through the UK wanting to control the electorate, through not allowing the Scottish Parliament to enable votes for 16 and 17-year-olds and European citizens and so on and so forth. I thought blocking and tackling those and trying to frustrate the process was a more likely avenue than a point blank no. But in order to get people to say yes to things, you have to say you're going to do things. So we certainly had in reserve our own homegrown referendum, which would have been compatible, in my belief, with the Supreme Court of that time, which was incidentally a much more liberal and inclined Supreme Court than the one under Lord Reid at the present moment. But secondly, obviously, an electoral test in Scotland would have been our recourse as well. And at that time, we were in an environment, remember, where support for the SNP was at 50% plus. Support for independence was at 30%. We're now in an environment where the reverse is true. Support for independence is 50%, support for the SNP is 35%. Now, you might speculate on what is the most likely environment that will lead to an independent country. I suspect it's when support for independence is at the levels it's at now. Because the political furniture, the political parties, the yes movement will arrange the political furniture at some point to allow expression of that 50% movement. I hope we can do that in the course of the next year, because that would be the best thing for the Scottish people. But I think in many ways that's a stronger position. But in terms of the question, what I would have done, if you want the UK government to bend to the will of the people of Scotland, then you have to have as an alternative something they find something even more unacceptable than what they hope will allow the people of Scotland to decide. You have to have something in the tank. But we're in a position now where we need not just the excellence of the legal opinion commissioned by Neil Hanby, we also need a political strategy which is designed to further Scotland's interests and which mobilises Scotland behind it, which inspires Scotland to say we can't just sit back and allow our chance of self-determination to slip away. We must mobilise to make sure it doesn't.
Thank you, Alex. And as we move to closing remarks, I wonder if you can just, again, just for clarity, because there's a lot of information here. This Scotland Self-Determination Bill is very short, and we profess not to have the time to read it, and very clear in its aim, which is the Scottish Parliament may make provision for a referendum on the independence of Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom to take place. I think I'm correct in saying that this is the only game show in town, in London town, or indeed any town, relative to independence. And whilst we continue to look at other methods and means of securing Scotland's independence, this is a very clear piece of potential legislation in that respect. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to make a plea to those who are in support of independence to give support to this bill, and also with that speak further about your companion piece, which is of course the opinion of Robert Cockdale, to bring your remarks to a close. Thank you.
Sure, thanks very much, Taz, for that opportunity. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Scotland Self-Determination Bill, it's a very short but very precise amendment to the Scotland Act. It's crisp, it's clean, and all it really seeks to do is to provide that equality of opportunity that I spoke about in relation to the UN Charter, to bring that into effect within the UK, provides parity with the peoples of Northern Ireland. And I'm very clear that I will work with absolutely anyone whose intention is on furthering the cause of independence and its eventual delivery, as swiftly as possible. So there's no barrier on my door, and I'm big enough and ugly enough to know that not everyone necessarily likes me, but they should certainly want to work with me on important matters such as this, because this is not about whether we like each other. It's about how we take Scotland forward into the future and how we do that as an independent country. What I would say in terms of the sort of wider picture and the importance of this opinion is this opinion is nothing unless it is utilised. So what it can't do, it can't magically deliver a strategy for independence, it can't magically change people's minds. What it does is changes our sense of opportunity and to give us some direction. It paints some of the challenges ahead and the potential challenges ahead. But what it makes very, very clear is that for the independence movement to make progress, the door is once again open. I think since ALEC secured the first referendum held in 2014, the reluctance of the UK Parliament to give another really tells its own story, that we are not going to struggle economically as an independent country, because they wouldn't keep us if we were the burden that we're so often told that we are. And I think that what the Scotland Self-Determination Bill does is, yet again, it paints another example of where Scotland has been completely reasonable. We've voted for mandate after mandate, they've been declined. We've submitted legislation which merely asks for parity with other parts of the United Kingdom. If that's not accepted or entertained, then again, that's something else that we've tried. And the longer the UK is willing to deny democracy in Scotland, the greater support for independence will grow. But at the moment, we're in many polls now over 50% support for independence. And with a galvanised movement, we can drive that up with a real campaign. We haven't even had a campaign to get to 52, 53%. So I would ask any supposedly independent supporting parliamentarian or activist, what is most important to you? Is it Scotland's independence, or is it holding on to an imagined grudge or grievance against other people who just want to do the very, very best for Scotland? And I think this opportunity, this opinion gives us opportunity to reflect on that fundamental issue and give us the opportunity to begin to believe that we're on the threshold of independence once again.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil. Ken, some final closing remarks from yourself?
Simply a constitutional convention was what the long chant that existed in the 1990s that led to the establishment of the Holyrood Parliament, and the constitutional convention, not the charade on Saturday, is what can break the impasse. We were promised one by the former First Minister in February of 2020. We still haven't got one. And Professor McCorkindale shows is that it's the bedrock for being able to argue internationally and at home. It is the basis, and it's time we had a constitutional convention, and the SNP should move on from Saturday to formalising what we were promised.
Thank you very much indeed, Ken. And finally to Alice.
Well, I was just reflecting that politics is about more than numbers. 30 years ago, when I was sitting there in this committee, the last time I think I was in this committee room, to tell you the truth, my sole contribution was to repeat a number of times it was disgraceful that English Conservative MPs were deciding on Scottish education. I just repeat the point, repeat the point. At that time, the SNP had 4 members of Parliament, and many people thought the idea of a Scottish Parliament was a distant hope, something somewhere a speck in the political horizon. Within a decade, the Scottish Parliament was sitting in Edinburgh, and the SNP were the opposition in that Parliament. And I go back to that story just to point out that politics is not just about numbers, it's about political will. And the 2 ALBA MPs, if I can be allowed a moment to speak in their favour, whether it's Neil on the Constitution and the Self-Determination Bill, or now in this hugely important opinion from Professor McCorkindale, or Kenny's work on Scotland, the land of energy plenty, suffering fuel poverty for its people. whether it's on the social and economic issue or on the constitutional issue, the fact that they are two in number doesn't prevent them having the political will to signpost the way forward for our country.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. I understand that Hamish, you may have a supplementary. I'm going to offer the opportunity.
No, it's fair to you. Voted no confidence in Circular Economy Minister Ronald Slater. Would you welcome him into the ALBA party if you wanted?
Well, look, I, as a matter of principle, since we're live, I hope that everybody in Scotland joins the ALBA party. In addition to the almost 8,000 members we now have, the third largest political party in Scotland now by membership. But Fergus will have to make his own decisions on these matters. He's an outstanding member of Parliament, in my opinion. He's somebody who fights fiercely without fear of favour for the benefit of his constituents. And of course, he is a member of what has undoubtedly been the most important political family of politicians in the history of Scottish nationalism. So, for all of these respects, I wish Fergus well, whether or not he becomes a member of ALBA as a matter for Fergus, but he, like the rest of Scotland, is welcome into membership.
Thank you, and thank you, Hamish. How appropriate that we end on the viewings, quite correctly so. So thank you very much to all who have attended. I hope you will take time to document. Thank you very much for those of you watching online. This is an extremely important piece of international legal opinion. And as I say, thank you to Ken Caskell, Will Hanby, and of course Alex Salmond for your presentations. Thank you for joining us.